Come on. Power to the people. Looking through my people.
Hello, everyone. We are New Sense Productions. We are
Noah Prince.
Sacha Thompson.
And Peyina Lynn Roberts.
Hey.
Hey. So we are DEI practitioners, or diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners, who have come together to create a platform to advance anti-oppression conversations, anti-oppression of any kind, be it anti-racism, anti-xenophobia, pro-gender equality, pro-equity, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, before we kind of get into this platform and what we wanted to do, we also want to acknowledge what's going on kind of right now, right? You know, what brought us together originally was we were professionals doing all of this in a Corona world, right? So, hey, let's come together via this platform to have these conversations. But then other things started to erupt. And so as DEI practitioners, you know, these are the things that we deal with every day. And so I want to acknowledge, you know, everything that we're kind of going through as individuals, but then also what it looks like in our work. And so I think that just makes the three of us coming together at this time much more meaningful.
Absolutely. I think that meaning too that you're speaking of, and the way that we leverage our relationships with each other to speak of ways that we can show up to confront oppression that Peyina is talking about, and to really, in a proactive sense, create equity in our society, in our workplaces, and in our communities. We're learning how to do that through our own relationships, talking honestly to each other. Peyina, you know, making sure that when we have anti-racism talks, that we, on the one end of the spectrum, make sure that we understand that anti-racism is targeted the most at Black communities, and on another end of the spectrum, making sure we don't erase other communities of color. Sacha, leveraging in, I've heard you many times speak of your Caribbean background and how that brings an additional lens to how you walk this world and informs who you are, and that you have a strong connection to family through that. So I'm finding that the ways that we slow down in real time as a white man, a Black woman, and an Asian woman, and coming together with just some of those as our differences and finding how we can hold this space, it feels healing to me. It feels strategic to me as we figure out what policies would actually create equity out there. And it feels like we're practicing in real time how to show up in behavior with each other, so that we're, I don't know, trying to walk our talk or practice what we are having conversation with.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, having said that, and feeling really close to both of you through this experience, I'm wondering, for you, what is it that kind of brings you into DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a career, and even as a, dare I say, lifestyle choice? And what is it about this platform, New Sense Productions, a nuisance to oppression? What is New Sense, you know, what does that mean for you? And maybe Sacha, I don't know if you'd want to start us off.
Yeah, you know, my journey really started with college and just understanding that I love understanding or learning more about culture, right? And different cultures. I grew up in a Caribbean household in Central Virginia, right? So we were the onlys in Central Virginia. So, you know, we were always kind of that family over there, but then going to college and seeing so many other cultures and experiencing other Caribbean folks like myself that had similar experiences kind of started my path. You know, I also have a marketing background. And so being able to tie what I know about culture and community and understanding how societies work into marketing has been my approach to DEI. And so I'm always centering those marginalized communities and those experiences in this space. And so rather than looking,
what does that mean, Sacha, for you?
Yeah, so it's really, excuse me, it's really understanding what's important to those communities. So for example, you kind of touched on in a previous conversation around the trans community. You know, what's important to them? What does visibility look like to them? And when I do events, I want to make sure that they feel seen and heard. And so in marketing materials and anything that we do, I want to make sure that that voice is a part of that centered conversation. And so that's how I approach this work is, you know, we can all talk about, let's be inclusive, let's all belong, but that's not everybody's experience. And we're seeing that today with these corporations that are like now waking up to, oh my gosh, we didn't know that these things were happening in the world. And so that's what's important to me. And in this space, we can start to really break down those relationships and have those conversations and center what's most important when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Wow. Appreciate that. I want to try to attempt to riff off of that. That
was just a little something.
You know what I mean? Just a little, little flavor in there. All right. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'm thinking about that too. What does that mean for us to forge equity and, forge our own relationships with each other in equity, and then also report to work every day in a marketplace, maybe in organizations or in a society that isn't necessarily run through a baseline of equity. And, my lived experience as a white man is that those systems tend to treat me the most favorably if I'm willing to conform and go along with the pathway led out to me. And my experience is that pathway isn't even given or invited to folks like you, Sacha, or you, Peyina, most of the time. So that in itself is some of the structural difference. And yet even the person with the privilege may not be walking the truest way they want to walk in their most authentic self. And that interests me in this conversation as well. I think I'm really, I come into diversity, equity, inclusion, I would say through the activism of my parents. My mom and dad, my mom was a civil rights organizer, anti-war organizer in the 60s. My dad actually was avoided the draft, and they met in the Peace Corps, spent about 10 years international, first in Micronesia, then in the Middle East. I was born in Iran through their travels. So some part of me came into a family that believed in travel and culture and exposure and standing up for each other in this world. Same time, the first person that ever intervened in my own, shall we say, unconscious racism was my mom. I remember reading a comic book when I was about 7 that had derogatory images of Black people. It was actually a Tintin book. And Tintins were these comic books that little white boys consumed everywhere about this little blonde detective that had these awesome adventures with his dog Snowy and went all over the world busting the bad guys. But similar to old school Warner Brother cartoons, the bad guys were always stereotype Black and Asian and other characters, and they used very racist language to describe them. I remember writing a song using racist language from a Tintin book, and my mom interrupted me one day and said, "That's not how we honor other human beings, and that's not how we walk forward in this world." And she made me read a book about Dr. King on that day. That was her first attempt as a white person, my own mother intervening in my behavior so I could understand some of the condition that had already come into me. Since then, it's been a progression of probably a step forward, a step backward. In my teenage years, I would say my white privilege protected me when I was going through a very rebellious stage that involved delinquent acts and drug use as ways to rebel against the society I did not want to conform with. And yet that individualism was not seen as a threat, the same way George Floyd, who did nothing, was seen as a threat, killed by police the other day. So I've never experienced that oppression because of my body or skin color, but I've slowly gone on a journey to understand how others walk in this world and how I could be a part of a liberated and connected society. I'm still on that journey. For 25, 30 years, I've been working around racial equity in education, working a lot in communities of color, began to be challenged by many family members, friends, close ones saying, "Why don't you work with other white men if you're committed to anti-racism?" And realized that one of the roadblocks to that was my own self. Some of my arrogance and ego that, to use the parlance of the times, saw myself as more woke than other white people, and therefore condemning as opposed to connecting to their own humanity in a way that led all of us as white people to challenge our conditioning around race and show up better for non-white people in this world. So for me, the NSP platform is a chance to carry that forward, carry the journey and the conversation forward in connection with two people who I know to be courageous, honest people who come from different backgrounds, but also share the same generational angle that I do. We're all Generation Xers. think Peyina, you said that's people born between 1961 and 1980. I was born in 78. I know you fall. I won't name your ages. I'm trained better than
Around that time. Yep.
Around that time. So I'm excited.
Somewhere else, like since 1965. So the start point is slightly different from different sources, but yeah.
Okay. You know, somewhere in that target. So that's a little about me. Peyina, what about you? What's some of your story? What are a couple layers to you?
Yeah, sure enough. Some of the things you brought up resonated with me a lot, especially about how if you behaved in accepted ways, then you would be allowed to grow. But if not, then not. And I have some examples. So my journey into the DEI world or work is unconventional. And by that, I mean that to date, even after years of trying, I'm still not fully seen as a DEI practitioner by many because of my unconventional background on how I'm like coming into this space. So let's say, so I'm Asian, you can see that. I was raised with very conventional Asian values of hard work, respect, and humility, right? And those values over time, I only came to realize that through experience and my PhD with a foundation in sociology. It's not a sociology PhD, but it was based on a lot of sociological theories. So those values were kind of come to question because I then understood through experience that it is relationships, and even more than relationship is being able to be embedded in the centrality, the center of networks of social relationships that are important for your upward mobility or whatever, that really is a stake. And so and this journey, you know, comes from an early age. So I've been both the oppressed and the oppressor, as we've had conversations before. And so since the age of 2, my family moved from Guatemala, moved to Guatemala from Taiwan. And then at the age of 8, back to Taiwan, at the age of 10 to Costa Rica, and then to Taiwan for college, and then to the US for various, to the US after that, to various states in the US.
I hope you got frequent flyer miles.
I know, right?
And at 4, I remember at the age of 4 that not only did I feel frightened to go to preschool because I didn't speak Spanish, but because the local Guatemalan kids would immediately validate my difference by imitating how we spoke, by pulling faces and laughing at the way my eyes looked. And so, and so different versions of this happen throughout the year, right? What's interesting is this, if you listen to the story, these are 2 minority communities in the United States, right? And yet we have all these kind of anti the other kind of behaviors, right? From an early age, learned from adult behavior, right? Because I remember observing adults in my Asian community, maybe either explicitly or inexplicitly telling us to be careful about just having anti-Black attitudes and behavior, you know, be careful when befriending this person, which inevitably created fear when seeing someone unlike myself. Well, fast forward several years, decades, right? I'm in the US, I'm married to a white British man. And this relationship widened my eyes more about how different I was being treated because of my race. Starting from not being able to apply for scholarships as a foreigner, even though my husband could, and he was a foreigner too, just from European country, right? Or in the case of, or having the associate dean of a certain graduate school tell me that, oh, good, you're getting married to your husband. You should really change your name. It'll increase your chances of getting a good job. Or even fast forward further.
Race and gender coming together on like a glove.
Yeah. And fast forward several years when I decided to move out of the academic world for health and other personal reasons and certified as a coach, now in leadership development and self-cultivation. And I had before that worked at a large organization where, you know, I had won an award to support Asian minorities in leadership development. and was denied it, not because, so I had wanted, but it required my supervisor's approval of it. And I was denied it because I wasn't being nice enough when expressing authentically how I saw the inequities of the process in not involving the perspectives of the people in the front lines. So
Well,
I've seen inequity in many, sorry.
Peyina, that right there is so interesting. One of the reasons I really believe white men and white people in general need to be involved in racial equity work, and men need to be involved in gender equity work, is study after study that cites when women, people of color, LGBTQIA members, others that are seen as outsiders in an organization articulate for equity or demand equity or speak up for equity, as you did,
Demonized, yeah.
in a way to elevate the culture for everyone, which is the opposite of selfish. You know through lived experience you are dinged and seen as being selfish, playing the militant card, complaining, using a reason to get a leg up. And I think we're seeing more and more when white men, and in a lot of cases when white women, turn a blind eye to those, or what we're calling, what the internet's calling the barbecue Beckys and the Karens, and the men too that do this. When we turn them, when we perpetuate these types of behaviors and benefit from these privileges, sooner or later, on group levels, they have damning impacts on people that aren't in our group, our white group or our male group.
That's
and so
right.
I really, I appreciate hearing your lens, your personal story on that.
And so because of that, there was a lot of motivation coming from different angles, right? Like accumulated over the years. And as a coach, I also coach people or folks, some of them of color, some of them not of color. But a common theme that I've seen across is this trying to find agency and voice in a work environment that is oppressive, and not knowing how to balance speaking up authentically without jeopardizing their jobs, right? And so coming to NSP, our Nuisance Productions, is this opportunity. For me, I've been thinking about the impact that I can have on individuals, and I appreciate that doing that as a coach, and also in some large group trainings that I do for organizations that serve populations that are experiencing persistent poverty. And so I kind of, I'm at the intersection of DEI and coaching. However, I feel that there is also a need, so much of a need, to do something at the macro level, reaching broader institutional aspects. And so, yes, and so thinking of both of your experiences, Sacha, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that she does in the workplace, and Noah, your experience over the years as well, I think just like this integration of the three of us would enable that platform for something more macro. And again, feeding on what you both are saying, importantly, also recognizing how we relate to each other.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, like as you're talking, what kind of triggered for me was your comment around people speaking up and not being fearful of speaking up. And I'm seeing so much of that right now, because again, you got a lot of these corporations that are waking up to, I didn't know that my employees were experiencing X, Y, and Z. And there's this balance of how much of my experience of racism within this corporation do I share? And can I still say it and keep my job, right? Particularly in light of COVID, where so many people are unemployed right now. And so it's just so much to balance. So, you know, I would love for us to continue dive into those types of conversations, because there is so much intersection, but there's so much importance in storytelling and sharing your voice and your experience. And that's something that I'm starting to do more of. And it's just, you know, interesting kind of, you know, you pointed to it too. And when you share these stories, then all of a sudden you're the threat, right? You're the naysayer. And I've been dinged so many times in that space that now I'm exhausted, right? So it's like, I told you a year ago that this was a problem, right? Now all of a sudden the world's literally on fire and you're trying to figure out
what happened.
Yeah. Why didn't I know this was a problem? Like, let me show you this email, right, from a year ago. So,
Mhm.
you know, I think this group can start to bubble up a lot of that, a lot of those conversations.
I love that. Peyina, as we come back to you to close us out, maybe a call to action and how folks can continue to not only stay included in this new platform, but how to get their own voices in it. I guess the quote that comes to my mind in passing it back to over to you is the paraphrase of James Baldwin. What is it? I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept.
Yeah.
And that was 40 years ago. Peyina, back to you. What are some ways folks can get involved?
I mean, we could just leave. So many said. At the same time, I think this platform that we're creating, the three of us, each of a different race and having a different understanding of what oppression looks like from our lived experiences. I just want to call each of our listeners and people that are engaging with us to be that brave self to examine how we have been part of an education that has a oppressive system as an approach, and how we have assimilated that and maybe unconsciously perpetuated that, either towards other races, towards other gender, either at work, different levels of seniority. And so just kind of use this platform as a way to examine ourselves first, because change happens from individual interaction. And sure, earlier I said the macro, but I think the individual interactions is where change happens.
Any last words from you, Sacha?
No, I mean, I'm just excited to see where this goes. I'm looking forward to hearing from the folks that watch this and the topics that they want to tackle and the questions that they have. Because that's what I get a lot of is, you know, how do I do this, particularly in light of COVID and everything that's going on right now. And so, you know, if they want to watch this, join our YouTube channel and LinkedIn and email us. Yep. You know, we can continue these conversations and just really make sure that we're doing this from an authentic place.
Power to the people, looking through my peephole, who's knocking at my door.
Thank you again to all of you for taking the time to tune in to the inaugural NSP production. It is a true joy and honor to be in company of Peyina and Sacha during this conversation and journey. And we most look forward to you, listeners, becoming part of this ongoing community, sharing your equity stories, and getting in network with us and each other. Please join us on our LinkedIn platform at www.linkedin.com/groups/124-11020, or simply click our LinkedIn icon on our YouTube channel. We look forward to hearing from you next time.
Detriment, raise that glass, spark that split, pass along.